based on Webtoon's comic of the same name. Sweet Home infected Netflix in December 2020. A South Korean apocalyptic horror, we're diving into the unique zombie-ish world of Sweet Home. Hello, you're listening to Utter Randomness. I'm Lulu, your host, and this isn't my voice. Sorry for using a text-to-speech generator, and this will continue to be a thing until my throat is better. Not only spoilers, but also trigger warnings. Sweet Home's main protagonist deals with severe depression and suicidal ideations as well as attempted suicide. The story begins with our main character, Cha Hyun-soo, who has had a family tragedy befall him. After a car accident rips his family away from him, Hyun-soo must grapple with his already lonely life. Unfortunately, in his struggle, he makes a plan to die by suicide. However, that plan is soon cast aside when something is incredibly wrong with his neighbor. Quickly, we realize that something has begun infecting people, changing them into monsters. But not just any monsters, they turn into beings that reveal their most hidden desires. Residents of the apartment complex, including Hyun-soo, can't get out of their building because it's on lockdown, and the security guard is mysteriously missing. Fighting for their lives, characters are easily divided as they try to move on with their differences in order to survive this horrific turn of events. They try to gather the remaining survivors to the ground floor where there is a supermarket, and it's easily defendable compared to other locations. Hyun-soo, who saved 2 orphans after the death of their father, is saved by a disabled tenant. However, shortly after, Hyun-soo is beginning to show symptoms of turning into a monster. This is where some things get weird, and yes, weirder than the lotus and protein monsters. Hyun-soo is now divided into 2 distinct beings, himself and the monster residing inside. Hyun-soo even has conversations with this being, fighting against him so he doesn't completely turn. Apparently, if Hyun-soo doesn't turn completely, the monster inside will merge with him and he becomes this super being, which seems to be the overall outcome when going off the prologue of episode 1. Not getting into too many specifics, after many deaths and people turning into monsters, we meet another character who has successfully merged with his monster, Young. He can actually shift his form and transform into other beings, which he does twice. Once with a gang of people after massacring people trapped in a church, and killing some of the members of the gang he planted himself within to hide. He wonders about which side Hyun-soo will choose. The military has started to offer safety to citizens who turn in monsters such as Young and Hyun-soo to them. After the apartment building collapses because of an explosion and some of the survivors are transferred to a camp, Young becomes sanguine as Hyun-soo wakes in an armored truck with him. This was based on a Webtoon of the same name by Kim Kan-bai and Hwang Young-chan, and it started principal photography in September of 2019. I haven't read Sweet Home's comic, and during the production of Sweet Home, some of the original stories weren't finished. Thankfully, director Liu Bok knew kind of how Sweet Home was going to end, or at the very least the direction the original creators were heading with their comic. However, he still decided to go in a different direction as well because of the platform it was being shown on. Another change from comic to TV was the addition of Lee Si-young's character Seo-yi-kyung. Her character was added because the director wanted to add a female character who can pull off really cool action scenes. Obviously, the monsters are the key to this story. Legacy Effects, VFX Studio Westworld, and Spectral Motion handled the visual effects and G for Sweet Home. Troy James, who is a contortionist, and Kim Seo-jin, who is a choreographer, handled the movement and motion of many of the on-screen monsters, Lotus, Glutton, Steroid, and that creepy spider thing. Now, monsters, who are the main antagonists for Sweet Home. They vary in size, shape, and ability. They can heal quickly, have superhuman strength, and can have specific powers abilities in regard to their evolution. Monsters are broken down into categories, and a kind of hierarchy in a way. At the bottom are the monsters, like the Lotus monster. All monsters begin by showing symptoms, which are massive nosebleeds, fainting, and auditory hallucinations. The infection, which is what I will call the entity or personality, will fight for control as the person mutates into a grotesque being. This takes time. Sometimes it takes only a day, other times a week. The next step is evolved monsters. This happens when the infection has kind of run its course, and the human consciousness that still resides inside offers no more pleasure to the infection. The human will then turn into a cocoon. The monsters are at their most vulnerable at this stage of evolution. However, the already monstrified beings have a sixth sense when these cocoons are being messed with and will flock to the area to eliminate the threat. When the person emerges from the cocoon, they are void of emotions, but we find out that isn't completely true. However, this is the general consensus. Monsters will protect evolved humans just as furiously as they protected their cocoon forms. Evolved humans can turn, or rather, encourage non-evolved humans to turn into evolved monsters or general monsters. Sweet Home became Netflix's first South Korean series to enter its top 10 in the US. Its main draw, outside of being based on a beloved comic series, was its portrayal of strong female characters as well as its visual effects. Others, though, critiqued that the soundtrack didn't really fit the narrative or story, and the lack of monsters in the later episodes was a letdown. I rate Sweet Home a 4 out of 5. I believe it's a unique take on monsters, infections, and zombie-like creatures. I didn't read the original source material, meaning I didn't go into this biased or with my own thoughts and was able to enjoy the show for what it's worth, humans making connections in the wake of a devastating, life-altering pandemic. Now, Netflix has neither confirmed nor denied a season 2 for Sweet Home as of August 6, 2021. There could be a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, Korean shows don't usually have multiple seasons outside of variety-type shows. Secondly, the pandemic is still a concern. Thirdly, getting actors/actresses back, and more. I'm anticipating a second season because of how the first ended. Cliffhanger, anybody? But I do have hopes. Do you like Sweet Home? Let me know. Until next time, cheers.